Hi, I'm former NFL quarterback Gus Frerotte. I played quarterback 15 years in the NFL. This is my show called Huddle Up with Gus. Each week I team up with my longtime friend Dave Hager, and we talk with guests about how sports shape their lives. Pro athletes, business executives, community leaders, everyone has a story to tell about sports. We invite you to Huddle Up with Gus. This week in the Huddle.
He is said to have one of the biggest Rolodexes in Washington, D.C. He is a pioneer in the digital sports sector. He is regarded as a leading broker in the sports management industry, and as a founder of AOL Sports, he developed strategic partnerships with such organizations as the NFL, WWF, MLB, NBA, NASCAR, NHL, and PGA. He's a professor, a philanthropist, and an entrepreneur. Please welcome into the huddle, Jimmy Lynn.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Today, we have a special guest from Washington, D.C., Jimmy Lynn. He's going to get in the huddle with us. Jimmy, we appreciate you coming on. And I think it's so powerful what you do from where you started, where you came from, and how sports shapes your life, and how you are helping others understand how sports can shape their lives.
Great.
So let's get going. And some of the questions we want to start with is about when you're young, right? And where was that first influence for you that really took you down the path that I love sports and I want to play it all the time?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Gus, for having me as a guest, and it's great to reconnect. We've been friends for a long time. So I'm actually half American, half Japanese. Mother's from Tokyo, father's from Oklahoma. My dad was a U.S. Army officer, so my first 8 years were growing up on military bases in Japan. And I think it was around 5 years old that I really got in love with T-ball. And it's been a lifelong love for the sport of baseball, but it really started with T-ball. And you think about back in the 70s, Japan was dominating the Little League World Series back then. And so it was actually really fun playing on an American team on the U.S. base, and we would practice and play against the Japanese Little League teams. And you saw a marked difference in how the teams were played, managed, practiced. Japanese teams would practice 8 hours a day. They'd run off the field, take their hats off. They have crew cuts. They bow to the managers versus the American way, which was much different. And I think I started to learn about discipline and how to play the game the right way and how practice is so important at a young age.
Yeah, no, that's great. And one of the things that Dave and I were talking about is you know, you being a military child and probably being on a base your whole childhood growing up.
Yep.
We were kind of wondering, what is that like to be in the military when you start playing sports? Is it like, are you going out, are you on the base, or do you go out and join other leagues? We don't understand that area at all.
Great question. For the Little League, you actually play other military bases. So I grew up on an Army base in Japan. So we played Little League teams from Navy bases, Army bases, and those, you have Little League tournaments and Little League games. But as you get older and you play in high school, you play not only the teams from other military bases, you play the schools of the private schools in Japan and Tokyo, who were the children of diplomats and business executives and government officials that live in Tokyo.
No, as far as like the coaches and that you had as on your baseball team, was it military officers? Was it dads? Was it like who really kind of influenced you as a coach?
Yeah. A great question, Dave. So when you're Little League, it's primarily dads. So military, it could be the officers or enlisted men. So it's usually the dads that are coaching. But when you get to the high school level, it's actually high school teachers, phys ed teachers that are teaching you. But I think what I learned so much was observing the coaches of the Japanese Little League teams, because they just ran such a disciplined and regimented system. And it showed you how important practice is and how important detail is and routine is to make you a better team.
What would you say the biggest difference between a typical Japanese player and a typical American player is at an early age?
I think the respect to the coaches. There's 100% dedication to the coaching staff, and the American way is similar too, but there's some kids that just don't really give a and during the training system, the coaches get 100% respect always.
Yeah, that is a big difference, right? And
it's almost a societal thing.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And you know, you try to. I coach high school ball. I coached Little League football with Gabe, and that is hard to get respect to the kids. Hey, let's work hard. Let's get it done in an hour and a half. I mean, you're talking about they're practicing for 8 hours.
8 hours, right?
I mean, it's just, how do you focus that long?
Well, I think the fact is land is limited in Tokyo, right? Because 38 million people living there. So when the kids have a chance to practice on a U.S. military base, and you have that whole field for the whole day, they take complete advantage of doing that. So they would just practice, routine practice, scrimmage over and over and over.
So who in your family, where do you get your athleticism from?
I guess on my dad's side, my dad, Irish American, fifth generation from Oklahoma City. So he was one of five boys, and they all grew up playing sports. So it was always sports. And, my dad first taught me the love of University of Oklahoma football because all my cousins went to OU. So, I got the love of sports from my father. The other important thing I think I want to share is when you're military brat, you live on that base for usually 3 years or up to 5 years. But you're actually, I think your socialization skills are very good because you're taught to make new friends every few years. Unlike my friends that grew up here in the D.C. area who might have gone to the same elementary, junior high, and high school for 18 years and have lived in the same neighborhood, you're forced to make new friends every 3 years. And I think you think it sucks as a kid, but when you look back on it, it actually teaches you to become better at social skills.
Well, in terms of adjusting and being flexible to meeting people, situations, everything, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, my kids are the same way. I wasn't in the military. I was in the NFL. We moved. I played for 7 teams, 8 because I played for the same team twice.
Yep.
And our kids lived. I took my family everywhere with me.
Right.
And we're still connected that way. And they had to learn. They had to do the same thing where they had to create new friends. We throw them into a new school when we go to a new town. And you had to learn all that kind of stuff, and I'm sure it was all the same for you.
Yeah, Gus, the other analogy I think, and you can relate to this, is your network of friends is so much bigger, like for you and Annie, but also for your kids, right? Because you're moving in all these different cities. And so because of social media, you're able to reconnect and stay in contact with friends you grew up with. And so I found that our high school from Japan has a reunion every 2 years, and we've been doing it for 30 years. I'm going to Nashville in mid-July for a high school reunion with students that went there over 3 decades, and that grew because of social media.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So when you were in high school and you were playing sport, what sports did you play in high school?
I played baseball, basketball, and football.
All 3?
Yeah.
And then, so who was the coach that influenced you the most?
There was a coach named Mr. Elliott in 7th and 8th grade. So we had a junior high basketball team, and I was a little scrawny point guard, and we had some really good athletes on the team. But he really taught us a lot about teamwork and discipline. In 8th grade, we won the championship in Japan, beating some of the bigger schools that had more people. But to me, a highlight was the championship game that my Japanese mother brought my Japanese grandmother and great aunt, who only wore kimonos, had never been to a basketball game. And it was really cool, like my African-American teammates going, yo, man, Jimmy's Japanese people are up in the stands and they're watching us. Like, we got to win for them. And that's a highlight. That was 40 years ago. I'll never forget that. That was a highlight.
So when you came back to the States, you were 16, right?
Yep.
Where did you go to school when you came back to the States?
Yeah, it was actually a difficult transition because I came back to W.T. Woodson High School in Fairfax, Virginia, which is 3,000 people. And most athletes only played one sport, and it was hard to break into the system. So I didn't play high school sports the last 2 years. I continued playing baseball in the summers, but I didn't play because I wasn't in the system. And so, the American way is, you start playing in junior high and you come up through junior high, then you have JV and you go to varsity. I didn't have that opportunity. So that was something that was a bummer, not playing in high school the last 2 years.
Yeah, that has to be a difficult transition.
What about like academically, like your schooling in Japan versus Fairfax?
Great question. I didn't go to a Japanese high school. I went to American high school on Army base. So the education was good, but it was better here in the U.S. because Fairfax County has one of the top 10 public high school systems in the country, and Woodson is regarded, I think, with Langley as 2 of the best public high schools. And so the education here was excellent. But for me, it was trying to assimilate going from a small high school in Japan where you play 3 sports. I'm class vice president sophomore year. You know people, and then you come to this big high school where you don't know people, and it was hard. Fortunately for me, my best friend from Japan had moved the year before. He went to a rival high school, Annandale. Became a great team. They won the state championship in '78. They're ranked #1 in the country. I became really good friends with a number of the Annandale guys.
So you were. So I remember when I was a kid in high school, and I was going to watch all the varsity games. I was a fan of like the guys that were in my high school. So is that kind of how it happened for you? I know you said you didn't play your junior and senior year, but were you still a fan of all the sports and went to all the games?
100%. Yeah, I came here. I went to Woodson games, but I went to a lot of Annandale football games. I mean, my friend was a really good receiver, and his father actually was a 4-star general, and General Guthrie was like my second father. And he had a love of sports that was crazy. It's like, I mean, Gus, you'll relate to this. Back in the '70s, there was something called the Hula Bowl, where the college all-stars would go play in Hawaii, and then the year after they would play in the Japan. I mean, a week later they'd play in the Japan Bowl. So when the college all-stars would come to Japan, General Guthrie, because he was such an avid football fan, he'd have the U.S. team come to our Army base to practice. So we got to see Tony Dorsett and Ricky Bell and the Selman brothers, all these great players like in the mid-'70s, which was a really cool experience. The other thing General Guthrie did really well was there was an HBCU game between Grambling and Morgan State in '77, and lo and behold, your predecessor, Doug Williams, was the quarterback. He threw a 97-yard touchdown pass in the Pioneer Bowl in Tokyo in '77.
Oh, you knew how great Doug Williams was going to be before anybody else did.
Yeah. I've told him that a couple times, like, you were there at the game, you remember that? He got excited. That was fun.
Doug's a great guy. I've met him several times, and I know he's working with the Redskins now. Yep. But he is an outstanding guy and had tremendous talent. And, he's one of the guys that broke the barriers.
Absolutely.
For a lot of African-American quarterbacks today.
Super Bowl MVP, I believe.
Yes, he was, definitely. So, Jimmy, one last question before we break the huddle. I wanted to understand, like, how you picked where you were going to go to college. You had all these influences in your life, living in Japan, moving back over, moving back, and then coming back to Virginia to go to high school. What really made you want to stay in D.C. area?
Great question. So it's funny because I'm a professor now, and I mentor these young kids. I sort of say, I know what you want to do. So back when I was a kid, I was obsessed with statistics and sports, reading the box scores, memorizing positions, teams. And my friends' fathers used to always say that I was going to go into sports broadcasting. I'd go into sports, and I didn't know how they knew, but they sort of knew. I wanted to work in communications, in radio and TV. So I went to American University in DC, which has a really good school of communications. I think recently it was ranked the #1 school of communications in the country. And I wanted to stay in the DC area, and I wanted to do communications. So I went to AU. Both my undergraduate and MBA at that time, which really I think set the foundation for my career in the media industry.
Great. That's kind of what we wanted to hear is like, cool. How people make these transitions in life and why they do it. And it really starts from when they're young.
Yep.
And you just keep these memories in your head. Yep. And that I want to do that. Like I was lucky enough to be able to go on and play the game that I played my whole life and loved. And not a lot of people get to do that, but we all have a love for something, right. And we transition into our next phase of life. Jimmy, you go through this whole transition in your life, and now you're going to college for the first time. And you talked a little bit about being, biracial, where you're part Japanese, you're part American, and did you have any of those struggles in high school that kept going on into college, or a lot of people let that go and college becomes a lot different for them?
No, Gus, we've never talked about this, you and I, being friends for so long. That's a great question. So I didn't appreciate being biracial, or I think part of it is growing up playing sports. Kids can be very nasty what they say. So whether a point guard or shortstop or cornerback, I got called a lot of names by other players. Chink, Jap, Gook, Nip, and it's a mind game. And so I think I pushed aside my Asian side and really became more into my Caucasian, my American side, right? And so it wasn't until my junior year in college, I was in the library, I was taking a sociology class, and a fellow student named Debbie Friedman from New York City, we're in the library, and she's like, Jimmy, you're really lucky. I said, why? She's like, you come from two backgrounds. You have an American background and you have a Japanese background. She's like, I'm Jewish. I only have one. And something about that, the light bulb went on at 21 years old. And from that point on, I embraced being part Asian, and until then I had not. I put it aside, and I think it was sports that had made me push it aside because kids can be so mean and nasty with their names. But that's where I really embraced being biracial. Working in sports, I was only one of a handful of guys of Asian background working in sports, but I'm really been pushing students of Asian descent to go work in the area that you're passionate about, follow your dream. Just because you're Asian, you have Asian parents that say you got to be a doctor, lawyer, banker, you don't have to do that. Go follow what your heart tells you to do. And for me, that's been really cool to see the growth of that. And I'm also telling the biracial kids, biracial is much more prevalent now because the demographics are shifting. Whether it's President Obama or Tiger Woods or Osaka, Rui Hachimura, look at your daughter's situation, right? Just the biracial is much more common than it was 25, 30 years ago.
I mean, we like to talk about, we have been about influences in your life, and you're exposed to the 4-star general, all those great people in Japan, and when you were exposed to in high school. But really, that conversation with Debbie was a major point in your your success, probably, right?
Yeah. So, but I'm glad you referenced So let me go back to General Guthrie. So my best friend's family moved from Hawaii to Japan in 7th grade, and he went from a 2-star to a 3-star at Camp Zama, and he told his son and his best friend, everyone is treated equally, race, rank, ethnicity. You cannot cut the line because your dad's the general. The other thing he did really cool that I observed was he played softball and he bowled with enlisted soldiers. A majority that were of minority descent. Most generals did not interact with enlisted soldiers back then. They were like the commanding general. General Guthrie said, treat everyone equally well, and that made such a deep impact on my life for the rest of my life. I looked at him as my second father. He spoke at my father's funeral in '08. He passed away a year later, but I always am carrying on his legacy of treating everyone equally, and that's something I learned at 7th and 8th grade.
Well, that's real leadership, right? And it doesn't matter if it's in the military, if it's in the NFL, if it's in the workplace, if it, and you hear this all the time because in the last few years I've been in the business world a little bit, and when you see people that don't interact with their employees and don't know them, and some people come up and don't even know their names, it's the same thing. And you have to understand your employees. You have to understand their profiles, and because you want to make them want to work for you. And I'm sure that you saw that in the military as well.
So, Gus, let me tell you a story that I think you'll love. So, General Guthrie was a diehard Redskins fan. So, living in Japan, we were 13 hours ahead. And so the NFL games would come on radio in Japan on Monday morning, but they'd be tape delayed. General Guthrie would call the Pentagon early in the morning, get the Redskins score, and he'd give us the score. But then the cool thing is his son Kevin went on to play football at Princeton. He was our all-time leading receiver until last year. His senior year in '84, he was number 2 in the country 1AA catches per game. Number 1 was Jerry Rice from Mississippi Valley State, and then it was Kevin. So Kevin tried playing the NFL for 2 years. He didn't make it, but his agent was Marvin Demoff.
Oh, wow.
And then, then a couple
that was
years
my
later,
agent.
Marvin had the idea to create this quarterback challenge. So my best friend Kevin actually created the quarterback challenge and the Battle of the Gridiron and ran that in Hawaii in the mid-'90s during Pro Bowl week. And the cool thing was General Guthrie was such an avid fan, and Sonny Jurgensen was there. So General Guthrie and Sonny Jurgensen would ride side by side in the golf cart as judges for the quarterback challenge.
And so, you go through your college career, and, what influence to really, because my kids, they don't know what they want to do. Like Abby knew what she wanted to do from 13. But for me, I still don't know what I want to do. I'm trying everything. And so for you, you talked about analytics.
Yep.
And did that really influence where you graduated from, what you wanted to do in college?
Yeah, so my senior year at American, my last semester, I took a consumer behavior class, and the chair of the marketing department, Dr. Mays, was teaching, and he pulled me aside. He said, Jimmy, have you considered grad school in marketing? I said, no, I have not. And he said, 45 students, only 4 got A's. You got an A. Marketing is natural to you. So he actually encouraged me to go get my MBA in marketing. And I spoke to a couple of mentors at the time, and they said, one school of thought is go for your MBA immediately so you don't start working, making money. You don't know what it's like. So I actually went straight and got my MBA. And I got my MBA in marketing, and I graduated at 26. And although I'd been interning in radio and TV, I really wanted to work in sports. And so Andy Arkershausen, who was the general manager of WMAL, which is the Redskins media partner, introduced me to his best friend, Charlie Brotman, who was a top sports PR guy in town. So as I tell my students all the time, I followed my passion. I'm $50,000 in debt from my MBA, yet I went to work for Charlie Brotman. I got paid nothing during the day, working 40 hours a week. I worked at a radio station at night. I was a screen caller for Ken Beatrice's sports talk show. And then for the Tom Snyder show, I was producing the board, making $6 an hour. And then on the weekends, I DJ'd weddings and bar mitzvahs and parties. And that's how I made money. But my point is I started at the very bottom. After about 2 months, Charlie then offered me $100 a week. And then 6 months later, he offered me a starting salary of 15 grand. I asked for 21. I started at 18. So when I tell my students I started at the bottom, I did, but I followed my passion.
You've been through these life experiences.
Yep. And
you can give kids a lot of influence on what they want to do in their life. And if you had one word to tell your students, like, this is the word that you got to live by, this is what you got to do, what's that one word you tell them?
Grit. Grit. It just having the ability to focus, be disciplined, and grind. And grind, especially in your 20s when you're starting, is grit. Grit to me is the key word.
I'm going to have you talk to my son, Gabe, because he's in sports management at Delaware, and he needs to learn that word. I've been telling him that forever, but kids never listen to their dads, right?
I wish you would have talked to me when I was 20.
Right. So you graduate from American University, and you're in D.C. Who is that team? Who is that person? What was that like for you as a fan of sports? I know you love sports. At that point, like, who did you want to follow? Who did you want to go after? Who did you want to watch?
This is really interesting. I do like the Redskins and we called the Bullets then, the Capitals. We didn't have a baseball team, but this is actually ironic. I was a big fan of Georgetown basketball. But I liked Maryland basketball and Georgetown basketball, but I loved the Hoyas of the 80s.
Oh, the Big East was great.
And the most ironic thing is, I'm now in my 13th year teaching at Georgetown. I live 3 townhouses down from Big John Thompson, the legend. I'm the professor who meets with all the recruits. So yesterday I was meeting with a recruit, and in comes Coach Ewing, and he tells the family, "Oh, you're meeting with Jimmy. He's our closer." And it's like so friggin' cool that here's a guy that I looked up to. I mean, Pat and I are the same age, right? And, he's hugging you, shaking your hands, telling those guys, "This is my boy Jimmy," and it's just so cool. Like, that's someone I looked up to and idolized. So I think it's really cool. And, I also, just like I talked about John Guthrie, I think of what Coach Thompson did was so powerful. Recruiting the players he did. But the thing Coach Thompson did so importantly was he stressed academics to their players. I mean, there's still a have to play the basketball in the basketball office saying, you're here to play basketball, but really academics is what's most important. And I think you see how articulate Coach Ewing is, how a lot of his players are. And I think that goes to Coach Thompson and the academic advisory team he built in the 80s, which most coaches didn't do back then.
You're doing the board work for the radio station. You're doing all these things. So what's your next step in your evolution?
All right, so let me walk you through the next 5 years, sort of where my career took off. So I did the PR job, but then less than a year later, I had an offer to go become a promotion director for a CBS radio station in the DC area. And the key message is, especially for the younger people, how important internships are. So the job requirement was 5 years of major market experience. I had no experience, but I had impressed the program director at the previous radio stations. So he hired me. So I worked in radio for 3.5 years. Then I wanted to stretch myself. I went into TV. So I went to Home Team Sports, which became Comcast Sportsnet Washington. Now it's NBC Sports Washington. And I was there, but just like radio, I felt boxed in, like this is the same way you market a radio station, a TV station. And I had the opportunity to go to a cable conference in '94 in New Orleans, and I heard a guy on the stage talking about AOL News, interactive news, how you can not only read the story, but you can engage with the story. You can do polling, you can do trivia, you can do chat, you can exchange pictures. And that, to me, was my aha moment. I wanted to do that in sports. So HTS is one of 22 regional sports networks in the country. I wanted us to stand out from the others, and I wanted us to have an interactive presence. So I went to AOL just because they were in Tyson's Corner in '94, and they said, we don't do deals with regional companies. We don't have a sports channel at this time. But 6 months later, they called me and said, we really like your ideas. Would you be interested in coming here and help us launch the sports channel? And that's where my career really took off in '95.
We want to start now with AOL, kind of right where we met each other.
Yep.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about AOL and what your role was there, and go through that timeline of, just the world was changing at that point. It really was.
Yeah, it really. So '95 was really year one of internet sports sites going up. Many of the first sports sites and league sites launched in '95 through the next couple of years. So my job was to work on content deals for AOL. Back then, you were paying $2.95 an hour. So the more you stayed online, the more the company made and the partner made. So my job was doing partner deals for the sports channel. What's interesting is we had met with some guys who wanted to create an athlete blog site, and they called Athletes Online at first. And so the first guys we signed up were Kajana Carter, who was the #1 pick, and Jim Harbaugh. And then in baseball, it was Eric Karros and Matt Williams. And so we were testing this concept of interviewing athletes. So I literally had this laptop. I would travel around the country with a laptop with that little foam cord you stick in the outlet with, gearing up. And then I would interview athletes. And when you interview athletes, I'm taking questions from the AOL members, and I would ask the professional athlete. They give me the answer, and I would type the answer. And that was the beginning of whatever you call blogging, everything. And so in the fall of '95, I believe, ProServe, which was in the area, Herb Swan, your agent, came by, said, "Hey, I want to do something. Like, you guys you got to do me a favor. You got to go interview my guy Gus." And I think one guy on the staff said, "But he's the backup quarterback." Herb's like, "I'm going to owe you. Go do this for me." So I said, "I'll do it." So I actually got my laptop, and I drove and I drove and I drove, and I got to Ashburn, which to me seemed like far away. And there's a reason this story's funny. And I got to your house. You and Annie welcomed me in, and I set up my laptop, and I asked you questions for 45 minutes, and you answered them, and you were really engaged. And I remember you were like, I think you called Heath and said, "Dude, you got to come over, man. This is like really cool stuff we're doing." And this was the beginning. Like, we didn't really know what we're doing, right? But it was really cool. But that was really the beginning of interacting, engaging with fans online. And you were one of the first guys to do it.
Did you see a budding podcast host in the making back then?
Not at all. Not at all. I told Dave this morning, I said I should have left the Redskins and went with AOL. It would have been a better job.
That would have been good. But what's interesting, I actually ended up staying at your house for 3 hours. I mean, I just hit it off with you and Annie, beginning of a friendship.
Well, it wasn't me that he liked. It was my wife. Everybody loves Annie. She has a great personality, and everybody loves being around her.
Great cook.
She is a great cook. She loves to feed people.
No, but the other funny thing is, about 15 months later, I was like, man, Gus lives way out there in Ashburn. 15 months later, they say AOL's going to leave Tyson's Corner. We're going to build a campus like the Microsoft campus, Nike campus. And lo and behold, the campus is in Ashburn, 5 minutes from your house. So
yeah, like a mile away, maybe not even.
Yeah, where that Walmart is, and now it's a Wegmans. That's where the AOL campus. So I ended up schlepping there from DC for 14 years.
Well, I mean, that area where the Redskin Park was in Ashburn, you can't even. There's no land left. Everything is bought and built on, and it's just an incredible how the expansion of that area in the last 15 years has happened.
Yeah, so Loudoun County is now, I think, the #1 highest income demographic county in the country. And I think you clearly attribute that to AOL. Then MCI opened up a campus next to us. So those were two hot tech companies that did really well. The employees made a lot of money, and that changed the whole ecosystem. New schools went up, new roads went up, shopping centers went up, and to this day, it's a fantastic county.
Around that time is when AOL bought Netscape, right?
Yeah, that was really funny. I still remember in '95, they called AOL Internet on Training Wheels, right? And Netscape did their IPO in fall of '95 with no revenue, and they did huge valuation. That was the big aha moment. But then a couple years later, we did end up buying Netscape. So it was cool. But I should transition to the next person, along with John O'Guthrie, who's very influential in my life. It was Ted Leonsis. I was just, I get invited to his house for a picnic that first month I start there. And we playing basketball against Steve Case, the CEO, and Ted. And after the picnic, Steve Case is an introvert. He's in the pool with his kids, and Ted's flipping burgers. He's an extrovert, very gregarious. So he's like, tell me something about yourself. And turns out he's a Georgetown grad, and we both have a love for Georgetown basketball. So that's where Ted and our relationship started. And I took Ted around the country for 4 years before he bought teams, and introduced him to Paul Tagliabue, NFL commissioner, became one of his best friends. Mark Carr, Lee Steinberg, and then eventually David Falk and Curtis Polk, which how he got connected with Michael Jordan. So Ted has been a mentor and a close friend for many years, but it was our love of sports that really got the friendship off the ground. I remember we were always trying to do something what we called a cybercast in June of '95, where I would take my laptop into the Orioles TV booth, and then we would take questions from fans, and then I would tell the questions to Mel Proctor, Jim Palmer, or John Lowenstein. And that was at the beginning of this whole interactivity on TV. But I remember at the end of the second inning, I had Tom Davis, the sideline reporter, interview Ted in between the breaks. And Ted looks at me and goes, "You left that to come join us? What the hell were you thinking?" I'm like, "I believe your hype about the internet is for real." But it's just funny how, later that year, I took Ted to a Washington Bullets game. I think it was December of '95. I took him to a Bullets game. We're sitting in the front row at center court. And Ted's like, "Where's the owner sit?" And I turned around and I said, "Mr. Poland's 4 rows back." And then Ted stands up, and he looks, he goes, "What is this seat?" I said, 19,000. He goes, "Man, can you imagine the pressure of filling this arena like 40, 50 times a year?" And now he knows that pressure.
Yeah, he sure does.
Well, I was doing a little research before we met here, Jimmy, and I read somewhere that you have one of the largest Rolodexes in the Washington, D.C. area, and I believe that hearing your stories. The networking is incredible.
Networking is, that's a key strength of what I do. And, they used to call me the mayor at AOL. They call me the mayor on campus now. But I love it in sports where Adam Silver likes to joke. He calls me the mayor during NBA All-Star Weekend. If I walk in, he's like, "All right, the mayor's here. The party can start." So it's good. But on the mayor side, but this goes back to growing up in Japan. Like, I learned the relationship skills and socialization skills. So I always try to treat everyone well, regardless of who they are. And that goes back to what I was taught by John Guthrie at 12 years old, 13 years old, observing how important the relationship skills are.
So you talk about analytics when you were young and how you love that. There's a lot of analytics going on in sports world today. There's the RFID tags that they put on the NFL players.
Yep.
Dave and I love watching when a Pirate finally scores and hits a home run. That doesn't happen that often. But
Occasionally they do that.
Yeah, occasionally. But there's the exit speed, and then there's how far it went. What do you think about all the analytics today compared to like when you were young and you were looking at the analytics?
I was just telling the story yesterday. When I was getting my MBA in '89, I took a stats class, and I wasn't very good with the quantitative stuff, but the professor actually loved baseball stats. So I actually used the computer modeling to predict the AL MVP in '88, '89. And I used, as my research, the Bill James baseball abstract books. And what was cool is when I went to AOL in '95, Stats Inc. was one of my first partners, and Bill James was one of the founding members of Stats. So I thought it was cool how this came full circle. And then the other part that's neat is, we're trying to get AOL members to stay online as much as possible. And so back in '95, '96, this was a new thing. And so what we did was we actually used the data feed from Stats and created the first real-time scoreboards on AOL, the first real-time scoreboards on the internet, and the entire game changed after that. It wasn't just live scores, it was fantasy. So we thought it was being primarily for the live scoring and the fantasy, but in reality, you're providing live updates for the first time, and that deeply impacts the gambling and betting industry. And, they're getting real-time information, just not on scores, but on injuries, weather reports, and so forth. And that's when sports on the internet really took off in '96, '97 because that real-time gaming. And now the gaming and betting is here in the U.S. So it's been just fascinating to watch that over the last 2 decades.
You're done with AOL. So can you go through the next steps? And I know you're with a brand new company.
Yeah.
But I know you had Jalen Associates.
Yeah. So,
you had a couple other things.
So, mentors are important. So I meet with Ted in 2008. He's like, "It's time for you to leave AOL. You've been there a long time. You're such a good guy." Jimmy, you got one of the best Rolodexes in the industry. Go help startups. Go take the knowledge you have, go help startups, and you're the best connector. Go connect people. Advisory business, and I had about 19 clients, and probably 13 or 14 were tech startups. So I'd be an advisor to them, helping them with strategy, but more importantly, helping them get connected to teams and leagues and brands and agency globally. And then Under Armour was one of my primary clients, where I was on a monthly retainer. So I had a great 3.5-year run at Under Armour. But a lot of the lessons I learned from AOL in the 90s, I applied to Under Armour at that time, because they were going through that phase of being a popular domestic brand into becoming a global brand, and trying to push Under Armour more into the social and digital and mobile. So it was taking lessons learned from AOL and applying them to the next, hot rising company.
I would say, would you say that's your biggest tech startup that you had, Under Armour, or is there another one that?
No, I just Under Armour was different because they were a commercial enterprise, and I was on a monthly retainer, so it was a good addition to all the tech startups. But the other thing I was doing at the same time was I also started teaching at Georgetown in 2005, 2006. So I teach in the business school, but then 11 years ago, we created a master's degree program in sports management. So it's people like for your son who, goes to a good college but doesn't do the internships, and they get out of college and they want to work in sports, but no one has been there. So we created a master's program targeted to people right out of college who want to work in sports. So we're now the largest program in the world with over 300 students. We built a program in Doha, Qatar, to help them prepare for the World Cup. I'm working on a program in Tokyo. I'm going to Tokyo in 2 weeks to lecture there. And the business side of sports in Asia hasn't been taught very well, and I want us to take a leadership position.
What's your greatest reward from teaching?
It's easy. Is giving back. So, Ted Leonsis came to AWOL in the 70s as the son of Greek immigrants from Brooklyn. He stated his parents made like 28 grand, and he came to Georgetown first time around a lot of smart, wealthy kids, and he was lost. And he was mentored by a 75-year-old Jesuit priest named Father Durkin. And Father Durkin mentored Ted so well, 3 years later, Ted graduates #1 in his class in 77. And then Ted goes on much about being mentored and giving back to the community at that age, and Ted taught me that. And for me, to this day, I mentor 24 students a year at Georgetown. A majority of the students are minority students and first-generation students. So mentees, well over 100 over the last 10 years, and to me, is positively impacting their life and changing their life is the most important thing to me. And in addition, I met two Chinese American kids from a Asian nonprofit I work with. And so 10 years ago, when the girl was 9, their brother was 13, I promised their parents I'd put them through college. So I'm paying for their tuition at University of Maryland. And Dazzy just graduated from Maryland last year, and now he works at Capital One in Wilmington, Delaware, and his sister's a sophomore at Maryland. So giving back and changing people's lives in a positive way is, to me, the most important part of teaching and being part of a university community.
That's great. So what are you doing now that is disrupting, because you've done so many things that have disrupted the industry, right? And your love of sports and your mentors you've had. So what are you doing now that's disrupting the industry?
Great question. So I am a co-founder of a great mobile video company called Kiswe Mobile. My two partners are Jung Kim and Wim Sweldon. Jung is you can tie everything we've been talking about for the last hour together with this. Jung's an immigrant from Korea, came here self-taught, Johns Hopkins, naval startup in '98 for $1.1 billion to Lucent. He went on to become president of Bell Labs, top research lab in the world. But he's been one of Ted's longest, biggest partners with the Capitals and Wizards and Mystics since the early 2000s. So I know Jung through Ted. And 5.5 years ago, Jung talked to me about what he saw was a third wave happening in digital, and that's mobile video. And he just, these smart guys like that can see a few years ahead. And he just saw where the cord cutting and cord nevers is happening, where the young people aren't going to be watching as much TV or watching more on the mobile device. So he and some of his friends from Alcatel Lucent are some of the best engineers in the world on cloud-based mobile video. And that's what we focused on. My strength is my contacts, my relationships. And that's where we're a good team, where we've got a bunch of really smart guys in technology and innovation, and I can get us in a lot of places, media companies, leagues, agencies all over the world, and that's what we're doing. So we've been at it for 5 years, and we're building what a few league execs have told us is we're doing professional work in the cloud that no other company in the world can do. So we're working with leagues, we're working with media companies, and we're doing this around the world, not just in the U.S., but in Korea, in Asia, and in Europe.
In terms of TV production, will that eliminate maybe the need for the mobile trucks and that kind of stuff? Or
Bingo. So one of the things we're discussing with a few people is we're basically becoming more and more like a production truck in the cloud. And so the way you're able to do things is it'll definitely reduce the cost on the production side in terms of having to have the truck there and the huge manpower by being able to produce games virtually off your laptop with most of the production taking place in the cloud.
So is that so? Like right here at Trib, they have a whole high school sports network, and they go out and they do all the championship games. They do games that are going on locally, whether it's wrestling or girls softball, and they try to go out and really give a view of what high school sports is going on. And I think that there's a lot of, they can't be everywhere. So is that something like a small thing, like for high school games? Is that something where KISS Week can really help an organization like this and to really bring all that info, all that data in real time and let those fans of those schools see that?
Yep. So there's a couple things. If you look at the three biggest reasons people use our mobile apps are for the video, socialization, and the gaming. But right now they're on all different apps. So what we've done is we put all three on the same platform. So for instance, we have a deal with the Pro Fighters League, one of the top MMA organizations. We did a cool event last night. You can actually watch the matches. You can also chat. But then you also have the gamification feature. Who's going to win the fight? How are they going to win the fight? What round are they going to win the fight? And so you see the usage increases dramatically when people don't have to leave the screen. So instead of watching something on TV, then on your phone where you're interacting with your friends, we put everything on the same platform. And that's a path that's definitely happening. The other really key thing about this, going back to analytics, is if you have a sports event on TV, that TV network can't really tell you who's watching the game, who's watching the air. Same thing, newspaper can't tell you who's reading their newspaper. Radio can't tell you who's listening to the radio. You can do Arbitron, you can do Nielsen, they can't tell you. But with a mobile app, you know everything about the user, so the analytics game is so much deeper. So that resonates with marketers and media companies so much more. And so more and more TV networks have to have a mobile companion going forward in order to play in a leveraged way across all the different multimedia platforms.
Definitely. I gotta introduce you to my buddy. You might have met him at one of my golf tournaments. Sean Gleason. Now he's the CEO of PBR, Professional Bull Riders.
Oh, that'd be perfect.
Because what they're doing is they're growing, right? And so back in the day, they could not get the scores out. When they rate a guy, he's on for 8 seconds, and they have judges writing their scores down. Well, back in the day, it would take 2 or 3 days for people in Venezuela and other countries to see what their score is because they have a whole worldwide scoring. Now it's all immediate.
Right, and here's the other perfect thing with that. Many of the top bull riders are from Brazil, are from Argentina, right? But when PBR does the feed, it's in English only. We have a way that a person can call that event off a laptop at home in their T-shirt, in Portuguese or in Spanish. What we do is we take the TV feed in, the caster calls the game in their native language, it goes up in the cloud, syncs it with the video feed, and you got the perfect match. So that's how these sports can grow their sport, by super serving each country, right? So if PBR wants to grow globally, they want to put it in Portuguese and Chinese and French and German. Here's a really cost-effective way to do it, as opposed to before you'd have to bring that person in the studio where you got studio costs, satellite costs, staffing costs. Here you just have the laptop, and that's the production truck right there.
Wow, that is amazing. That's disrupting the industry, don't you think?
Shaking it up.
That's shaking it up. So, hey, we're going to break the huddle right there. Jimmy, we're going to come back to you, and we're going to do a segment we call No Huddle. Right now, we're going to go into our No Huddle segment, and we're going to fire some questions at Jimmy, and we're going to see how fast he can score a touchdown. So, Jimmy, Dave, fire the questions.
All right, Jimmy, what's your most prized piece of sports memorabilia?
I have a 1966 baseball bat from the Los Angeles Dodgers. My favorite uncle's next door neighbor was the general manager of the Denver Bears, who was the AAA team for the LA Dodgers. He knew I was a big baseball fan, so he gave me this bat in 1966.
Nice.
Great.
What about the most overhyped element in sports today?
Most overhyped element? LA Lakers. I don't know. It just, there's just so much. I don't know. I get sick of
There's so many
some
to
of the
choose
big
from.
glamour teams, and too much hype for the teams, and too much media coverage for these teams that I don't think deserve it.
How about if a guy doesn't want to be on his team anymore and gets to do all his stuff through social media, and then gets a trade and goes to another team?
Exactly.
And it's just on the news every day.
Right.
It's
and you get
crazy.
tired of it. You get tired of it.
All right. How about the best game day atmosphere you've ever been a part of?
This is actually going to surprise you. Princeton Penn basketball at the Plestra in 1999. So here we are. My friends are coaching at Princeton, and think about it. It's Penn is up 25 points over Princeton with 15 minutes to go, and Princeton runs that motion offense that Pete Carril invented, and they came back from 25 down, and Chris Young and Mason Rocca led that team. And it was a thing where you just turn to your friends, you kept saying, no effing way, no effing way. But that atmosphere, because Plestra is probably the greatest basketball venue in the country. And I don't know, it took me back to the 1950s. And even though I go to all these Super Bowls and Olympics and World Cups, that's something I never forget.
All right, got a couple more for you. What's your most disappointing or heartbreaking moment as a fan?
Well, the Capitals. I mean, the Capitals did so much good for me in the city. I've been a season ticket holder 20 years. Brought so much joy to the city, but having them lose Game 7 in overtime, a couple of those have been very, very disappointing.
All right, last one. If you could trade places with any athlete ever, who would that be? Just for a day.
Just for the day? You know what I like is, I'm not a huge fan of LeBron, but I love, just like I've dedicated the last part of my life to helping underprivileged, low-income kids for Generation College. What LeBron is doing with those kids in Akron he's changing those lives. Those kids are going to go to high school, going to go to college, and each person's life you change dozens of people. So I think what LeBron has done is heroic.
Wow, Jimmy, thank you so much. We got to cut it off because we got Coach Ditka coming on in a couple of minutes, and we got to really hear from Iron Mike. But appreciate you coming on. I mean, your transitions in life and where you've come and what you're doing now for people is incredible. So thank you so much from Huddle Up with Gus.
Thanks, Jimmy.
I'd love to get a copy, and I want to share it on social media. So
yeah, we definitely will. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.